Pierre, I want to come to you. How do you connect? Can you connect these two for us? There's the issue, of course, of the way that the law enforcement agencies in this country changed, but there was also the surveilling of Muslim Americans. How do they connect? What was the good that came out of it, but also, of course, the bad?
Well, one of the things that happened as a result of 9/11 is the law enforcement and the intelligence community, but particularly the FBI, had to admit that they were caught completely flat-footed. And I can recall a meeting with a very senior official at the Justice Department in the days just after 9/11. And this official basically admitted that the United States had no sense of what other al-Qaeda operatives might be inside the country. And there was this desperate attempt to figure out, okay, we know the countries we think that al-Qaeda operates from. We need to figure out all the people that came from those countries. And there was a huge issue of overstays and people who had stayed in the country longer than was allowed by their visas. And the FBI and the Justice Department was saying, we don't know if there's another wave. There was great fear of another wave. And I think those were the seeds of the Patriot Act in terms of the government being granted these vast powers of surveillance, all in the name of we need to protect. It was out of fear that those things developed. But you know what they say in the South, and my mother used to say, haste makes waste. And critics would say that they were granted too many powers. People were rounded up, assumed to be terrorists when there was not much evidence indicating that they were. And so I can tell you that it was born out of this sense that the United States government had no clue as to whether, okay, is there going to be another wave? And they had a very clear sense that al-Qaeda was not done. And you recall a few months later, Richard Reed tried to blow up a plane with a shoe bomb. And I just remember law enforcement saying over and over, these people, these terrorists are incredibly creative. Who would ever thought that they would use a plane and turn it into a missile? So I think part of what your question belies is this notion that there was fear and the government started just acting very quickly to resolve what it thought was a huge vulnerability.
And Peter, this idea of civil liberties and fear, it also really turned into a political issue when you think about the modern politics, the rise of former President Donald Trump. Talk a bit about how the Patriot Act and really the fear of Americans, it turned into a sort of political movement.
Yeah, it's really remarkable you think about it, what a difference we've seen over these last 20 years. You know, for all of the excesses there were in that post 9/11 period in terms of targeting Muslims who had nothing to do with anything in the United States, you had a president at the time who at least said that was the wrong thing to do, right? President George W. Bush went to a mosque 3 or 4 days after 9/11 to make the point that this is not a war on Islam. It was not a war on Muslims. It was a war against extremism and against violence, but not against a part of the American public. And that was a theme he repeated throughout his presidency, even if there were examples of his administration taking actions that would seem to belie that. He at least believed or spoke to the notion that this was not supposed to divide us the way that ultimately it would. You fast forward to see Donald J. Trump, you know, in that clip that you showed at the beginning of the show, speaking during his campaign in 2015, saying we should ban all Muslims coming into the country. What a radical change. What a radical change in message from the very top leadership of America from 2001 to 2015, you know, and rather than the other way around, rather than, you know, taking the rhetoric too far at first and then moderating it, we've gone the other direction where it became more fashionable later in this 20-year cycle to target Muslims who had nothing to do with anything that it was violent whatsoever. It was suddenly acceptable and rewarded politically by the election of President Trump, and he then, of course, enacted this travel ban that he had talked about in the campaign. That's a remarkable evolution, and it's what I don't know we'll see where will this go from here.